There was something almost cinematic about the scene. The room, dimly lit and thick with a faint scent of cologne and fresh banknotes, set the stage. Jaime Oldroyd sat in front of a camera with an air of swagger that could fill the room. He wasn't alone. Another man, broad-shouldered and grinning, leaned in as stacks of 20-pound notes piled up between them. On the table was a mountain of cash, pound 150, 000 in total, neatly arranged and handled with the kind of reverence that drug money often inspires among those who mistake fleeting wealth for invincibility. The video would go on to become infamous, not because of the money or the bravado, but because it marked the beginning of the end. In just a few short minutes, it captured everything investigators needed to confirm their growing suspicions and, more crucially, to light a fuse under one of the UK's most sophisticated cocaine trafficking networks. At the time, Oldroyd had every reason to feel untouchable. His operation had flourished in secrecy for years, with well-oiled supply chains, loyal lieutenants, and a steady stream of high-purity cocaine funneled from Liverpool and Greater Manchester through to Scotland and beyond. The money was good, obscenely good, and Oldroyd had taken to the lifestyle with the eagerness of someone who believed his fortune was immune to consequences. He wore designer clothes, drove high-end cars, and vacationed in sun-drenched villas with the kind of confidence that comes only from years of evading the law. He was bold, sure, but not smart. And in the world of organized crime, it's rarely the quiet, calculated players who fall first. It's the ones who talk too much, who flaunt too hard, who forget that eyes are always watching. The video was first noticed not by law enforcement, but by rival criminals and social media users. It circulated through WhatsApp groups and Snapchat stories like wildfire. Some saw it as a flex, others as a fatal mistake. Among those who took particular interest was a regional crime unit already circling Oldroyd's network. For months, they had been gathering intelligence, mobile data, financial trails, surveillance images, and witness tips. But what they lacked was something tangible, something that would justify the launch of a high-cost, multi-agency operation. The video changed that. Investigators, watching the clip, dissected every frame. The setting was familiar. Oldroyd's flat in Warrington, a location already on their radar thanks to previous anonymous tips. The second man in the video was quickly identified as Jaime Simpson, a known associate with past drug convictions. More importantly, the cash was pristine, likely fresh from recent deliveries, and matched figures that had been intercepted in cryptic text exchanges between suspected couriers. There was no denying it now. The men weren't just suspects. They were active, thriving participants in a transnational narcotics ring, and they were arrogant enough to broadcast it. It would later be confirmed that the video had been recorded as a form of intimidation and self-congratulation. Oldroyd had fallen out with a lesser figure in the supply chain, someone who had questioned the payment hierarchy or hinted at skimming. In response, he did what few major traffickers would ever dream of. He staged a demonstration of wealth to silence dissent and assert dominance. The act, juvenile as it seemed, was a window into the psychology that would define the fall of the empire. Oldroyd wasn't merely running a business. He was building a persona, and in doing so, he left behind a trail of digital breadcrumbs that authorities would follow with increasing precision. With the video as their starting point, investigators intensified their efforts. Surveillance units were deployed more frequently around key addresses in Merseyside and Cheshire. Automated number plate recognition, UNPR, technology tracked vehicles known to be associated with Oldroyd and his close allies. Undercover officers were inserted into bars, gyms, and car washes frequented by the crew. Every move was documented. Every conversation, where possible, was intercepted. They monitored burner phones, watched patterns of communication, and mapped routes of suspected drug couriers. One such courier was intercepted months later on the M6 motorway near Kendal, in Cumbria. The vehicle, a plain, unremarkable rental, had been under surveillance for weeks. Inside were tightly wrapped packages of cocaine, with a street value exceeding £1 million. The driver, a mid-level operative with known connections to Oldroyd, was arrested on the spot. His mobile phones, once encrypted and locked, were eventually breached, revealing a treasure trove of messages, call logs, and GPS data. And there it was again. References to the Flash, a nickname attributed to Oldroyd by those who both admired and feared his recklessness. By the time the video reached national investigators, the operation had taken on a life of its own. What began as a local probe into mid-level drug distribution had escalated into a multi-jurisdictional task force involving the National Crime Agency, NCA, regional organized crime units, and local police departments. The case was no longer just about street-level sales. It was about a pyramid of corruption and logistics that reached from Spain's Costa del Sol to the industrial estates of northern England. The video, in this new context, was seen not merely as evidence, but as a symbol, a metaphor for the fatal flaw at the heart of the organization. It represented the moment ego overtook caution, and image became more important than survival. Ironically, it was Oldroyd's need to be seen that made him visible to law enforcement. As his confidence grew, so too did his public footprint. He began posting more frequently under fake names on social media. He was spotted at boxing events, in VIP sections, posing for pictures that would later be subpoenaed as evidence. He made no effort to cover his tracks when traveling. His purchases, Rolexes, designer shoes, gym equipment, were often paid for in cash in person under CCTV. Friends and associates noted the change in his demeanor. Where once he had been quiet, observant, even paranoid, now he was loud, dismissive, almost careless. The investigation continued to expand, eventually implicating dozens of individuals including suppliers, distributors, enforcers, and money launderers. Some cooperated when faced with overwhelming evidence. Others attempted to flee, only to be caught boarding flights or hiding out in Spanish villas. Yet no arrest made as much noise as Oldroyd's. When authorities finally moved in, they found him in a rented home in the Northwest, asleep beside a girlfriend who had no idea of the scale of his activities. Around him were telltale signs, cash-stuffed envelopes, encrypted phones, and notes indicating offshore bank accounts. It was, in many ways, an anticlimactic end for a man who had once counted £150,000 on camera as if it were pocket change. In court, the video was played to a silent room. Prosecutors argued it was a direct window into the arrogance and criminality of the operation. Defense lawyers tried to dismiss it as bravado, a prank, a harmless piece of content taken out of context. But jurors weren't fooled. The video, along with mountains of surveillance data, phone records, and financial analysis, painted a damning picture. Oldroyd and his co-defendants were found guilty and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The empire, once invisible and impregnable, had been exposed by its own vanity. Looking back, investigators often cite the video as one of the most pivotal pieces of early evidence in the case. It wasn't just about the money or the message, it was about what it revealed beneath the surface. Here was a man who, in his pursuit of respect and fear, gave away everything. He showed them the players. He showed them the game. And perhaps most crucially, he showed them that no matter how powerful a criminal network appears, it only takes one moment of ego to bring the whole thing crashing down. This section will trace Jaime Oldroyd's transformation from an outwardly legitimate car hire business owner into one of the most elusive and powerful street-level cocaine distributors in the northwest of England. It will explore how he used the car hire front both as a money laundering mechanism and as a recruitment ground, identifying young men who were eager for fast money and could be shaped into loyal runners. He capitalized on Warrington's strategic location between Liverpool and Manchester, using it as a hub to discreetly move product without attracting the attention that bigger cities might. The narrative will dig into how Oldroyd's operation was structured like a decentralized franchise, with multiple layers designed to shield him from direct criminal liability. Safe houses were maintained in ordinary-looking cul-de-sacs, rented under false names or through intermediaries. Surveillance was minimal because the setups were intentionally bland and domestic. Couriers were trained to use prearranged codes, swap SIM cards, and operate on a strictly need-to-know basis. The cocaine was often stored in garage freezers or hidden compartments, then broken down into packages for redistribution across the region. This section will also focus on the psychological and emotional appeal of Oldroyd's operation. He didn't just run a network. He curated an image of power, freedom, and wealth. For many of the young men who worked for him, the alternative was minimum wage jobs or joblessness. Oldroyd's world offered designer clothes, club tables, and the illusion of upward mobility. He styled himself like a businessman, clean-shaven, well-dressed, and always composed. That image helped him maintain loyalty, discourage betrayal, and stay 2 or 3 steps removed from the product itself. But the story will also emphasize that no structure, no matter how well-built, is immune to human error. A courier might get pulled over. A neighbor might notice something unusual. A small piece of carelessness, like a missed burner phone swap or a flashy car parked in the wrong place, might trigger a police tip. And once surveillance began, the supposedly invisible structure became more visible than Oldroyd ever imagined. This section will delve into the shadowy, calculated world of Jaime Simpson, a man who operated not with the ego and flash of his associate Jaime Oldroyd, but with cold precision and invisibility. While Oldroyd cultivated an image, Simpson cultivated silence. From the outside, he appeared to be just another ordinary man in the northwest of England. No extravagant cars, no Instagram brags, no visible trappings of wealth. Yet beneath that anonymity, Simpson was quietly orchestrating the national logistics of one of the UK's most prolific cocaine trafficking operations. The narrative will explore how Simpson built and ran his own intricate distribution system. He focused not on local street sales or image, but on movement, ensuring that kilograms of high-purity cocaine made it from suppliers to key regional points across the UK without interruption. His genius was in the timing and structure. He relied on a tight network of couriers who drove seemingly innocuous vehicles, many with hidden compartments, using routes carefully chosen to avoid patterns that would attract law enforcement. Simpson's methods were methodical and professional. Each driver had a limited view of the bigger picture. They were told only what they needed to know, and often didn't know what they were moving. Pickup and drop-off locations changed frequently. Communications were brief and coded, with burner phones replaced weekly or even daily. GPS devices were often used for nonverbal location marking, allowing drops to happen without face-to-face meetings. He ran the logistics like a freight operation, one without invoices, manifests, or questions. This section will contrast Simpson's near-clinical efficiency with Oldroyd's ego-driven tactics. Where Oldroyd loved risk and the appearance of success, Simpson avoided attention at all costs. He was more like a ghost in the machine, someone whose absence from the spotlight was not accidental, but central to his survival strategy. This contrast not only made them an effective team, but also highlighted the different psychological dynamics at play in the empire they were building. However, the story will also underscore the vulnerabilities of Simpson's system. Trust, while essential, became a weak point. His entire operation relied on the silence and consistency of multiple drivers, each of whom represented a possible leak. Once law enforcement began to follow the chain of movements and match license plates with familiar patterns, they started to decode the structure. One mistake, a delayed drop, a conversation overheard, a familiar face caught on surveillance near a meeting spot, and the dominoes began to fall. The same compartmentalization that had protected Simpson for so long made it difficult for him to see where the cracks were forming. Eventually, the discretion that had kept Jaime Simpson invisible for years worked against him. Once one courier flipped, investigators were able to use small details, receipts, mobile pings, CCTV snapshots, to recreate his routes. And when they did, they found not just a drug runner, but a man who had quietly moved millions of pounds worth of cocaine through the UK, never once drawing attention to himself. This section will delve deep into the shadowy world of Alan and John Tobin, two brothers from Merseyside who operated not with noise or notoriety, but with military-like discipline. Unlike many players in the UK drug trade who sought power through image or violence, the Tobin brothers pursued something different: invisibility through structure. They were not the kind of criminals who posed with stacks of cash or flaunted supercars. They didn't need to. Instead, they functioned like the CEOs of a hidden empire, meticulous, methodical, and deeply embedded in the logistical veins of Britain's cocaine supply chain. From their position near the top, the Tobins rarely handled drugs directly. Instead, they controlled access. They had long-standing ties to international suppliers, often routing large shipments of Class A drugs into the UK through hidden compartments in lorries or inside modified commercial vehicles. The sheer volume of drugs they moved, multi-kilogram consignments, meant they were not playing the street game. They were wholesalers, supplying vast regions through a carefully selected circle of trusted middlemen. People like Jaime Simpson and Jaime Oldroyd, in fact, were effectively downstream clients in their criminal business model. A significant part of the Tobins' success lay in their operational security. They invested heavily in encrypted communications, often switching devices and platforms to avoid detection. Their messages were deliberately vague, their movements calculated. Any hint of suspicion led to a change in vehicle, number, or meeting point. Surveillance footage would often show them arriving separately, leaving no electronic trail, often communicating only through intermediaries. Their ability to mask their own presence became one of their greatest strengths. But the brothers were not naive about the violence that came with the trade. While they kept their hands clean in the public eye, they didn't hesitate to rely on enforcers when needed. One name stood out in particular: Robbie Broughton. A former MMA fighter turned enforcer, Broughton brought muscle and menace to the operation. He wasn't just for show. His presence was calculated to intimidate, to collect debts, to ensure silence. He formed a layer of protection between the Tobins and any threat, reinforcing their image as untouchable. This section will also explore how their structured detachment from lower-level operations gave them the illusion of safety. They never flashed cash, rarely communicated with dealers, and always appeared to be one level removed. But law enforcement had begun to close in. Years of surveillance, wiretaps, and incremental arrests of their subordinates began to paint a fuller picture. Every courier caught, every middleman flipped, drew a clearer map of the hierarchy, and at the very top sat the Tobins. Their eventual downfall came not through arrogance or exposure, but through patience. Investigators worked backwards, threading together phone records, vehicle movements, and encrypted messages. What cracked the case wasn't a single dramatic mistake, but the sheer weight of data, a slow, grinding unraveling of a web that had once seemed impenetrable. Even their carefully planned silos, which had kept them insulated for years, eventually became points of vulnerability when multiple layers of their network collapsed simultaneously. This section will end by reflecting on the paradox of their strategy. The Tobins had built a business model that mirrored legitimate supply chain management, complete with risk mitigation, delegation, and corporate-style hierarchy. But in the end, no structure, no matter how well-guarded, is immune to human error, surveillance, and the long memory of law enforcement. This section will serve as the backbone of the documentary's investigative thread, detailing how law enforcement painstakingly dismantled one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking operations in the UK. At the center of this was Operation Dreadnought, a meticulously orchestrated 14-month campaign spearheaded by Cheshire Police, with support from the National Crime Agency, NCA, and various regional forces. What makes this chapter compelling is not just the scale of the criminal enterprise they were targeting, but the level of precision and restraint officers had to exercise in order to keep the operation covert until the right moment. The story begins with a growing unease among local enforcement about rising drug-related activity in Warrington and surrounding areas, increased overdoses, gang movement, and tips about bulk deliveries that didn't fit the profile of small-time dealers. Initial surveillance efforts were simple: unmarked cars, street cameras, and spot checks. But it wasn't long before investigators began detecting patterns: vehicles making repeat trips across long distances at odd hours, people avoiding regular communication channels, and cash pickups that didn't align with any known financial activity. It was clear that something bigger was happening beneath the surface. From there, Operation Dreadnought moved into full swing. Detectives began mapping the movements of key suspects like Jaime Oldroyd, Jaime Simpson, and eventually the Tobin brothers. Surveillance teams were deployed to track vehicle routes and stake out safe houses. Each target had a distinct behavioral profile. Oldroyd was flashy but elusive, Simpson was calm and hidden, and the Tobins rarely surfaced in public. These differences required tailored surveillance strategies for each individual, often involving drones, long-lens photography, and covert foot surveillance in suburban neighborhoods. A major breakthrough came with vehicle tracking. Simpson's operation, in particular, relied on logistics, cars and vans making frequent journeys between Merseyside, Warrington, Manchester, and even further afield. Officers discreetly placed trackers on several vehicles, logging their locations day and night. One van made multiple round trips between the northwest and the south of England, suggesting the movement of bulk narcotics. The consistency of these routes gave police enough probable cause to begin requesting further warrants. At the same time, the technical side of the investigation ramped up. Intercepted mobile phone data, CCTV footage, and cell site analysis helped place suspects in key locations at crucial times. Simpson and the Tobins were using encrypted phones, likely EncroChat, which delayed real-time intelligence gathering, but once the encryption platform was cracked by international law enforcement agencies in 2020, investigators were handed a goldmine. Conversations between members of the network were suddenly available, revealing logistics, drop points, and coded language that police would spend months decoding. One of the most critical tasks was linking individuals to physical evidence without alerting them to the investigation. Forensic teams conducted covert searches and collected DNA, fingerprints, and surveillance data from abandoned safe houses and impounded vehicles. Small slips, a coffee cup left in a car, a fingerprint on a cash bundle, a hair found near packaging materials, slowly built a web of irrefutable proof tying each suspect to the operation. Every discovery, no matter how minor, was catalogued and corroborated. Throughout the operation, officers had to walk a razor-thin line. A premature arrest could spook the rest of the network. Tipping off one courier could collapse the entire case. So detectives worked in layers, isolating surveillance teams, and ensuring only a tight core had access to the full picture. They coordinated takedowns with near-military precision, planning for months in advance how they would execute simultaneous arrests across multiple cities without losing a single key player. The climax of this section will build toward the major bust, which unfolded over several days and included raids on homes, lockups, and vehicles. Officers seized cocaine worth millions, cash hauls, encrypted devices, and modified vehicles. Dozens were arrested, and crucially, no major suspects escaped, a testament to how tightly police had choreographed the endgame. This section will close with a reflective look at the emotional and psychological toll on the officers involved. 14 months of quiet work, long nights, cold stakeouts, and the constant fear of a leak or mistake, all building toward the moment when the empire finally collapsed. Operation Dreadnought will be portrayed not just as a tactical success, but as a case study in how modern, data-driven policing can take down even the most insulated and well-funded criminal syndicates. This section will place the audience directly into the heart of the most dramatic moment in the entire investigation, the final run of the drug convoy that would become the crown jewel in the takedown of the Oldroyd-Simpson-Tobin network. This was the night when months of surveillance, intelligence gathering, and patience culminated in a coordinated police strike on the M6 motorway near Knutsford. Told in a near real-time style, this chapter will carry a cinematic intensity, emphasizing not just the tactical execution but also the human emotions, the mounting pressure, the adrenaline, the decisions that had to be made in split seconds. The story opens in the early evening of August 2nd, 2018, as two vehicles set off, one a Scout, the other a transport van loaded with 186 kilograms of cocaine, expertly hidden in custom-built concealment areas. What seemed like just another delivery run for the traffickers was anything but. Law enforcement, already months deep into Operation Dreadnought, had wiretaps, vehicle trackers, and surveillance units primed for this moment. They knew the destination. They knew the route. All that was left was execution. The scene then shifts between the movements of the convoy and the calm but alert tension inside the police command center. Surveillance officers were tailing the vehicles in unmarked cars, while aerial units from the National Police Air Service tracked them from above. Real-time radio chatter revealed subtle course corrections as the Scout vehicle, driven by one of the couriers, tested for tails, changed lanes, and made unnecessary turns, trying to detect whether they were being followed. Meanwhile, traffic officers were positioned at strategic points along the M6. The goal was to isolate the convoy in a relatively quiet stretch, away from the public, where they could move in without danger to bystanders. The element of surprise was critical. The convoy couldn't suspect a thing until it was too late to escape or destroy evidence. The psychological tension will be sharply drawn here. In the van, the couriers had no idea that every mile brought them closer to a trap. But the pressure was mounting for the police as well. One wrong move, a visible tail, a premature signal, and the suspects could bolt, abandon the cargo, or even crash. Officers had to stay calm, wait for the green light, and rely on months of planning to carry the moment. Then came the command, "Go." Marked police units swarmed in, boxing in the vehicles near the Knutsford Junction. The van was forced to a controlled stop. Armed officers flooded the scene, guns raised, shouting commands. The couriers, stunned and disoriented, were pulled from the vehicles and detained on the spot. Inside the van, sniffer dogs led officers straight to the hidden stash, tightly packed blocks of high-purity cocaine, wrapped and concealed with industrial precision. The aftermath unfolded quickly. The area was secured, evidence was logged, and the arrested men were taken in for questioning. It was the first time the network realized the walls had truly closed in, and that this wasn't a random check. This was a calculated, intelligence-led dismantling of everything they had built. This section will end by emphasizing the symbolic weight of that night. It wasn't just a drug bust. It was the unraveling of a multi-million-pound empire in the span of a few minutes on a motorway. For law enforcement, it was validation of a year's worth of relentless, quiet work. For the traffickers, it was the moment where confidence turned to panic and freedom turned to years behind bars. This chapter picks up immediately after the dramatic M6 bust, zooming in on the wave of panic and violence that swept through the criminal network in the days and weeks that followed. What had once been a well-oiled and tightly managed operation began to unravel almost overnight, not just because of arrests, but because of fear. The first signs of chaos came from abandoned communications. Encrypted phones that had once buzzed with coordinated runs and drop-offs suddenly went silent. Couriers and street-level dealers went underground, spooked by the precision of the bust and unsure of who might be talking to police. This vacuum of leadership triggered a power scramble. With Oldroyd and Simpson detained and the Tobin soon exposed, there was no longer a clear chain of command. Some tried to assume control. Others simply fled. Then came the retaliation, and with it a chilling signal that the underworld was reacting not with silence, but with violence. Arsonists targeted properties linked to Jaime Oldroyd's family, including firebomb attacks on homes in Warrington. These weren't random acts of destruction, they were warnings. Someone within the network, or from a rival crew sensing weakness, was sending a message. The empire was crumbling, and no one was safe. The attacks turned fear into paranoia. Who had flipped? Who was cooperating? In response, police issued a series of Osman warnings, formal notices used to alert individuals of credible threats to their life. These weren't handed out lightly. They were proof that the gang's internal collapse had become a matter of public safety. People once at the center of the drug network were now running scared, from both the law and their own former allies. The tension wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Fear succeeded where interrogation often failed. Some individuals refused to speak, not out of loyalty, but out of terror. Others, under mounting pressure, began cooperating. Quiet confessions, partial disclosures, and leaks allowed investigators to piece together further elements of the conspiracy. The once impervious network was now riddled with cracks. This section will also explore how the police capitalized on this fear. Using intelligence from wiretaps, burner phone data, and confessions, they exploited every fracture in the organization. What had been hidden behind layers of compartmentalization, safe houses, encrypted channels, proxy drivers, was now being exposed one piece at a time. Ultimately, this chapter will paint a vivid picture of the psychological collapse of a drug empire. The story won't be one of high-speed chases or dramatic standoffs, but rather of anxiety spreading like smoke through a community of criminals who suddenly realized they were no longer untouchable. Fear, not force, was what finally made the walls come down. This final chapter brings the story to its judicial crescendo, the trials at Liverpool Crown Court that formally dismantled one of the UK's most lucrative drug empires. It begins with the transition from covert investigation and arrest to the sterile yet high-stakes atmosphere of the courtroom. Here, the narrative will shift to focus on how the Crown Prosecution Service methodically presented their evidence, weaving together surveillance footage, phone data, encrypted EncroChat messages, vehicle tracking logs, and seized cocaine hauls. The drama inside the courtroom was quiet but devastating. One by one, key figures entered guilty pleas. Knowing the strength of the case assembled against them left little hope of acquittal. Jaime Oldroyd, whose bravado had ignited the beginning of the end, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine and cannabis. His swagger was gone, replaced by the blank expression of someone who knew the outcome was already sealed. He would receive a 14-year sentence, effectively ending his career as a street tycoon. Jaime Simpson, the shadowy operator who had kept the wheels turning behind the scenes, also pleaded guilty. His years of staying invisible hadn't saved him. What once made him elusive, his silence, his operational caution, now made him appear calculating and culpable. He, too, was handed a lengthy sentence that ensured he would not see the outside world for many years to come. At the top of the hierarchy stood Alan and John Tobin, the Merseyside brothers who had controlled massive cocaine shipments from their perch above the street trade. The court heard how they trafficked more than 400 kilograms of Class A drugs with a street value of over £30 million, using encrypted communications and a fleet of specially modified vehicles. The Tobins' clean-cut appearance and minimal criminal records had kept them hidden for years, but they now faced the consequences of their long-running empire. Each was sentenced to more than 20 years in prison, signaling the final collapse of the supply chain. This section will also explore the sentencing of secondary players, the couriers, the enforcers, the scouts, each with their own piece of the puzzle. The court proceedings made clear how structured and scalable the operation had become. It was a pyramid with defined layers, and those in the middle paid heavily too. Guilty pleas came not only from fear of harsher sentences, but from an undeniable flood of evidence. Hidden compartments in vehicles, burner phone logs, stash house surveillance, and testimonies from insiders formed an airtight narrative of guilt. Yet, beyond the legal mechanics, this chapter will probe deeper themes: the illusion of security once offered by encrypted technology, the seductive lie of impunity, and the ultimate cost of greed. The gang had relied heavily on EncroChat and military-grade encryption, believing this would shield them indefinitely. But EncroChat had been cracked, and its secrets spilled out into courtrooms across Europe. What once seemed unbreakable turned out to be the very thing that sealed their fate. The final scenes of this chapter will offer a reflection, not just on crime and punishment, but on ego and ambition. These men had built their lives around the illusion of control, wealth, and invulnerability. They used fear to protect themselves, loyalty to sustain their empire, and arrogance to flaunt it. In the end, none of those things saved them. It wasn't just law enforcement that brought them down, it was the same hubris that made them successful in the first place.